Good evening, my friends. Wherever you are tonight, maybe sitting on your porch beneath a quiet sky, maybe driving home through the hum of streetlights, pause for a moment, take a breath, because what you're about to hear is not just another headline floating in the noise of the world. It's something far rarer, a truth that refused to stay buried. In the sweltering heart of West Africa, under a sun that burns the sand to glass, soldiers of Burkina Faso did not just make an arrest, they severed the veins of an empire built on fear. His name was Asmani Dou, the brother of Jafar Dou, the commander of Jamaat al-Qaeda's branch in the Sahel. To most of the world, he was invisible, a whisper in intercepted calls, a ghost on dusty roads. But to those who've watched this war from the inside, Asmani Dou was the quartermaster of chaos. He was the man who turned suffering into logistics. Every bullet, every motorcycle, every gallon of diesel that kept the desert burning moved through his hands. He didn't carry a rifle, he carried ledgers. He didn't shout commands, he signed receipts. And yet, when the soldiers of Burkina Faso finally cornered him and placed those cold irons on his wrists, they did something extraordinary. They silenced the heartbeat of a network that fed terror from the dunes of Niger to the forests of Côte d'Ivoire. But when that happened, when a small African nation achieved what billions in foreign wars failed to do, the world said nothing. No breaking banners. No studio experts applauding courage. Just silence. Cold. Calculated. Profitable silence. Ask yourself, why? Who benefits when victory is hidden? Who gains when Africa's courage is buried under indifference? That's what we're here to uncover tonight. Because this story isn't only about an arrest, it's about sovereignty itself. About a people who've decided to stand without permission. The operation that brought down Asmani Dou was not quick, not easy, and not glamorous. It began near Djibo, a town where the horizon itself looks tired, a place that has seen more ambushes than sunrises. For weeks, soldiers moved like shadows across the scrublands. They slept in the dust. They listened to whispers carried by the wind. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. The same supplier, the same trucks, the same untraceable payments. Asmani wasn't a fighter, he was an architect. He arranged shipments of diesel hidden in grain convoys, purchased motorcycles that became the chariots of raiders, funneled money through front companies stretching from Marseille to Dubai. He even supplied field medics with black market bandages. Every gun that roared, every village that mourned his fingerprints were there, invisible but undeniable. When his network fell, the battlefield changed overnight. Fuel trucks stopped coming, radios went silent, commanders waited for money that never arrived. And yet, the global press, the same institutions that spent decades dissecting every explosion in this region, looked away. No praise, no applause, not even curiosity. Because perhaps the money trail led somewhere too close to home. Inside Burkina Faso's intelligence files are documents that suggest foreign intermediaries were quietly pushing funds and fuel through shell companies registered in Europe, contracts too clean for the bush, signatures too polished to belong to bandits. If this is a local war, why do the receipts lead to Paris? If this is Africa's chaos, why do the invoices come from the West? Someone is paying for the fire to stay lit. Someone profits from the smoke. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, life continued under the weight of constant tension. Funerals became routine. Prayers turned into defiance. Yet, despite it all, the Burkinabe soldiers fought on. They weren't chasing glory or headlines, they were fighting for existence. Across the Sahel, people whispered the news of Asmani's capture like a secret blessing. On market radios, through static-filled frequencies, they heard that the web could be broken. Mothers smiled quietly, fathers nodded, but beyond the continent, it was as if the world's microphones had all been switched off. One soldier asked his comrade, "We captured the man who armed our enemy and the world says nothing?" The other answered softly, "Maybe they only cheer when we lose." And when you take 17 mezgues in free full row, that is the tragedy of perception. African victories don't fit the narrative. They disrupt the quiet myth that Africa must forever depend, forever kneel. A sovereign Burkina Faso is not supposed to exist, and that makes it dangerous. Look deeper into Asmani's empire and you find an entire ecosystem of complicity. Border guards who looked the other way in Côte d'Ivoire. Fuel smugglers in Gao trading diesel for weapons. Cash couriers in Niamey carrying envelopes marked only with initials. The Sahel is more than a desert, it is a network of arteries. Cut one and the others bleed harder. Imagine dawn breaking over that final compound, a few tin roofs shimmering under pale sunlight, soldiers closing in, gunfire cracking through silence, then nothing, just the sound of wind and surrender. They didn't know then that their victory would be ignored. They didn't know the world would scroll past their courage. They only knew that for a moment, they had done something that mattered. But in faraway studios, the pundits continued their rituals, polished words about instability, radicalization, failed states. Not a single mention of victory. Because silence, my friends, is not ignorance. It's strategy. Days after the arrest, vengeance came like a storm. Convoys ambushed on narrow roads, drones buzzing above, explosions flickering on the horizon like desert lightning. Jamaat al-Qaeda, humiliated by the loss of its quartermaster, lashed out. Each attack carried a message. You may capture a man, but you cannot capture silence. Inside Ouagadougou, tension hung like smoke. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, unyielding, appeared before his commanders, eyes weary, uniform dusty. He spoke quietly, but his words struck like thunder. They think fear will break us. They are wrong. Fear only teaches us who we are. And in that moment, the vow was born. Burkina Faso would become one of the safest nations in Africa. To some, it sounded naive. To others, it was prophecy. Around campfires, soldiers repeated his words like scripture. In markets, mothers whispered them like prayers. Even cynics found themselves listening. Because hope, even reckless hope, has power. But the enemy was evolving. Reports soon spoke of foreign-made drones, encrypted radios, and cash traced to banks far beyond the Sahel. Every time one artery was cut, another opened. The war was no longer about terrain. It was about technology, about information, about betrayal. One convoy was ambushed with precision too perfect to be coincidence. Coordinates had leaked. A mole inside had sold them out. The line between soldier and traitor blurred. This was no longer a war of uniforms, but of loyalties. Yet even as trust fractured, resolve hardened. Each fallen comrade became a promise. Each grave became a reason to fight. Then came the speech not from a palace, but from a forward base carved into red earth. Traoré stood before his soldiers, sand still on his boots. If we fall, he said, the Sahel falls. But if we stand, Africa rises. It wasn't a speech for applause. It was a warning to the world and a reminder to his men. Western analysts called him impulsive. Commentators labeled him defiant. But the people called him something simpler. The man who refused to kneel. And that's when the second war began, not of bullets, but of stories. Because when you control the narrative, you control belief. And belief decides who keeps fighting. In a small village near Kaya, a farmer told a visiting reporter, "When our soldiers win, nobody writes it. When they die, everyone does." That one sentence, spoken through cracked lips, carries the soul of this conflict. If a victory is unreported, did it even happen? If courage is erased, who benefits from the erasure? This is the new battlefield perception. Because the silence of the world is not absence. It is participation. For the soldiers, that silence bites deeper than bullets. They fight, bleed, survive, and wake up to headlines that reduce their struggle to rising violence. No names, no context. That is how silence kills. It kills acknowledgement before it kills hope. And that is why Traoré's speeches now sound less like updates and more like counterattacks in the information war. Every word he speaks is aimed not just at his people, but at anyone listening, anyone who still believes that justice should not require permission. The arrest of Asmani rippled through society like a tremor. Markets grew tense. Families argued. Fear seeped into conversation. Terrorists shifted tactics, turning ordinary life into psychological siege. They taxed villages. They demanded loyalty. They punished defiance. In one village, a mother was forced to cook for the same men who had taken her son. In another, an elder was executed for warning the army about an ambush. But even beneath that fear, something miraculous happened. Resistance bloomed. Civilians began organizing self-defense groups. Traders pooled money to repair roads for military convoys. Teachers held classes in secret huts for displaced children. It was as if under siege, the soul of Burkina Faso had chosen to rise rather than bow. Meanwhile, politics transformed. Traoré's government, young, untested, began tearing down old taboos. French bases were closed. Security pacts were rewritten. And with Mali and Niger, the AES alliance was born not from comfort, but from necessity. Three nations, once divided by colonial borders, decided to fight as one. For the Burkinabe people, it was rebirth proof that Africa could defend Africa. But in Western capitals, it was labeled dangerous nationalism. Aid slowed, sanctions whispered. Because sovereignty, it seems, is only celebrated when it stays symbolic. When it becomes real, it offends. The cost of that independence was brutal. Fuel prices spiked. Imports vanished. Families tightened belts. And yet, the people did not bend. If this is the price of freedom, said one shopkeeper, then let us pay it in full. Even the critics, scholars, opposition voices, civil servants could not ignore the strange unity rising from hardship. Democracy, in its rawest form, was surviving under fire. Displacement followed 2 million citizens driven from their homes. Camps swelled, roads turned deadly. Yet even there, among hunger and exhaustion, the flag still waved. Radios still hummed with Traoré's words. Hope became the only currency left. Across Africa, the ripple spread. In Mali, crowds carried signs reading, "One struggle, one people." In Niger, soldiers wore Burkinabe patches beside their own. And in the silence of Western headlines, young Africans saw something the world had missed: dignity being reborn. When Traoré's words reached the halls of the United Nations, "We will not kneel to ask for help while standing on our own soil," some diplomats clapped, others walked out. The message was clear: sovereignty has a cost, and not everyone is willing to see it paid. Here lies the truth few will print. The war in Burkina Faso is not just about security. It is a test to see if a nation stripped of comfort can still choose pride over pity. That, my friends, is what terrifies the world. Because a truly sovereign Africa cannot be managed. It can only be respected or feared. And to understand that, Americans need only look in their own mirror. Decades ago, their young soldiers trudged through the jungles of Vietnam, winning ground, losing headlines. They came home to silence, to doubt, to questions of, was it worth it? Now, in the Sahel, Burkinabe soldiers ask the same question under different stars. The terrain has changed. The wound has not. Because when courage is ignored, it bleeds into history unnoticed. That is why this story should matter far beyond Africa. It's about whether small nations can still fight for their own freedom without asking permission from the large ones. It's about whether sovereignty is a right or a privilege granted by those who already have it. Today, the AES alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, is rewriting the rules of survival. They don't wait for ambushes anymore. They hunt them. They share drones, intelligence, and patrol routes. A threat to one has become a target for all. Fuel depots that once supplied militants are now ash and rubble. Smugglers are being unmasked. And on local radio stations, instead of propaganda, villagers hear messages of resistance. Your nation still breathes. Your fight still matters. But progress is not peace. The enemy adapts. Now they strike schools and markets, where hope is easiest to wound. They whisper that victory is impossible, that resistance is futile. Traore calls this the war within the war for the spirit, because if despair wins, the rest follows. So tonight, as the dust settles over the Sahel and the world scrolls past another quiet headline, remember this: Burkina Faso did not just capture a man. It challenged a machine built on money, weapons, and deceit, and dared to say no more. The world watched in silence, but in that silence, something powerful was born: a refusal to surrender. The arrest of Asmani was not the end. It was the beginning of defiance. It proved that terror can bleed, that courage can survive abandonment. But it also revealed the most painful truth of all, that silence is never neutral. Every time the world looks away, the flames rise higher. Across the villages of Burkina Faso, mothers still send sons to the front. Soldiers still ride through roads that may never bring them home. But they fight believing one thing, that their story will not die in the shadows. They fight so that the name Burkina Faso stands not for survival, but for strength. So tonight I ask you, which side of silence are you on? The side that watches, or the side that speaks? Because silence, my friends, is the last weapon of empire. And outrage. Your outrage is the first weapon of the free. If you've listened this far, you're already part of the resistance. Don't let this truth vanish in the algorithm of apathy. Share it. Speak it. Let the world hear what silence tried to hide. Imagine one last scene. A soldier standing on red earth at dawn, rifle resting on his shoulder, the flag of Burkina Faso fluttering behind him. No medals, no headlines, just resolve. The world may never hear his voice, but it can hear yours. Because silence is how empires survive. And outrage. Outrage is how nations are born.